Welcome to the Numerology and the Astrology for April 29th, 2020. If you add all those numbers together, you get a 19, and if you add the 1 and the 9 together, you get a 10. Once again, we have this incredible opportunity to take a moment and allow ourselves to start over and begin again. The number 10 is the number of radiance, boldness, courage, the willingness to take a risk, being able to jump in where angels fear to tread. And throughout our life, we have to just take these risks. We have to be bold, and sometimes being bold is about boundaries and drawing a line and saying no. So sometimes standing in your power is to not let somebody continue to try and manipulate you and push you over and push you down when you have a clearly defined boundary. And that sounds easy, but that's really hard to do because we live in a society where you're supposed to be nice and you're supposed to be kind and all this kind of stuff. And I was recently listening to one of my friend's videos about one of his journeys and experiences in his younger years, and I loved in one section, that all the people that were in charge said to him, well, you can't talk to this person. And he said, so of course what I did is I went and talked to that person. So, to take a look in your life about where somebody tries to have authority or power over you, and they try and define you, and they say, well, you have to do what I say, and if you're going to fit in and if you're going to belong, you have to do what I say. And that's always that moment. You have to remember my friend's story that he was like, well, if somebody's going to tell me I can't do it, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And so I understand that there's a point where things are appropriate and things are not appropriate. But, if you really need to talk to somebody, because you need to find out the information that's critical, then you should have the right to talk to somebody in one way, shape, and form. Now, I know we're in coronavirus land, and because we're in coronavirus land, no, you can't just kind of do a middle finger position and tell people that you're going to just do whatever you're going to do, because you can negatively impact others. And so there's always this catch-22 about, are you standing up for yourself to do what's right so that you get the information that you need, or are you doing it because an authority told you to do it, which means that then you're collapsing your energy down. But the number 10 is a number of power. And whenever you deal with power, you deal with a push-pull. And whenever you deal with a push-pull, you end up with boundary issues, that there are these conflicts that are related to boundaries. And it's a tricky call to stand in your truth and draw a line related to a healthy boundary. And so there is great power in choice. And right now, it may not feel like you have choice because of the whims of this virus. But there are many places and ways that you do have choice. And it's important to activate them fully so you can feel as if life continues to grow and expand for you. So while many people feel like the government has taken their power of choice away and on a lot of issues, and that can be really tricky, there are also places that you can be at choice. And you have to recognize, that the hardest part for me in being in a free will zone, which I think Earth is sort of a free will zone on one level, I think the hardest thing is to play the game to do no harm in life. And that can be much more difficult than it sounds. Finding out how you can move through life without negatively impacting people can take all of your ability to hold boundaries, because people will take as much as you will give them. And they will take and take and take and take and take until you are completely exhausted and totally worn out. And so it's really hard to hold boundaries because some people were raised with great trauma and dysfunction, and they do not understand boundaries. They're like a child. They're like a 2-year-old that's throwing a temper tantrum and is just screaming and screaming and screaming, metaphorically or energetically, until you collapse and buckle and they get their way. And the more damaged a person is, the more they will tend to not notice a boundary, or the more they will tend to ignore that line again and again and again. And, this is a sign of a frozen child self that was damaged very early in life. And it's really challenging when you're trying to do no harm, but people keep coming at you with this negativity that's inspired by others, or their own dysfunction, or their neediness, or their desperation. And, while you can try to stay back and allow them their process, there are moments when lines need to be clearly drawn and boundaries for your life defined. And it's essential that you know that you do not have to take on the karmic dysfunction of others. It is not your job in life to heal everyone. It is your job to try to tell the truth and do no harm to the best of your ability, and to do it with as much kindness and compassion as possible. And you have to allow people to have their own journey, because I find that I'm not a healer of people. I am a facilitator of truth. And so if a person is ready to hear the truth, then they will move huge amounts in a short period of time. But it's not because I really did anything. It's actually because they are ready, or I'm the excuse for them to step into a different part of themselves. And so it's really tricky when somebody is really stuck, and you have to allow them to process through their dysfunction and not judge them. But when their dysfunction continues to impact you in negative ways, that is when you have to take your power, make a choice, and clearly define a line in the sand. And speaking the truth is hard to do when you know that someone is suffering. I think that's the hardest thing I find, is that I feel somebody suffering, I want to help them, but if again and again and again I try to help them and we don't get anywhere and nothing ever changes, and they're just feeding off of my positivity or my energy, that's not really serving them, and it's for sure not serving me, because they're taking energy and they're just going to drain me, and they don't know they're doing it. That's why you can't be angry at them. They don't know that they're doing it, but those kinds of people can inflame other people to do harm, and lash out, and that's again a big no-no. Okay, so that's why sometimes I choose to be quiet and not speak, and sometimes not speaking is the best approach. But then there are moments when that is also not working. And while the truth might be painful, sometimes a person needs to hear the truth, because they may not know that, other people are reacting to their emotional state and lashing out at others in some sort of futile attempt to protect them or help them, right? So, so as a result, it's like, sometimes a person needs to have the truth so they can grow, and they can stop making up stories that are not true in their mind. And it's really hard to tell someone that they are continuously causing suffering and that you need to walk away, especially because everyone has the potential to awaken and make a change. And you want, some want you to do it for them, but in reality, you cannot do it for anybody else. Like, each person needs to stand up in the number 10 for themselves, and they need to stand on their own 2 feet, and they need to recognize that their choices and decisions that have led them to this moment and these circumstances are 100% on their shoulders, and there is no one to blame except themselves. And so you cannot save someone from the karmic lessons that they are here to learn, and that's why sometimes stepping back is correct, and sometimes telling the truth as kindly as possible is the way to help a person the most. So today is one of those days. Like, do you need to step back? Is it the power position for you to step back? Is it the power position for you to tell the truth as kindly and as lovingly as possible? Do you need to draw a boundary? Do you need to draw a line? Because sometimes that's what needs to happen. You actually need to create a boundary. Okay, so the astrology for today, the moon is in the protective and calm-seeking sign of Cancer until bedtime this evening, at which it moves into the proud and creative sign of Leo. Mercury semi-sextiles Venus today, and it will do the same to Neptune tomorrow. And so you might feel torn between two mindsets, and because of that, I'd say don't expect to make firm decisions about things, because there is a distinct possibility that you might be rationalizing your feelings or emotionalizing your observations. So neither of which makes you completely clear on any subject. So in other words, you're probably not clear today and tomorrow, all right? Now, under these aspects, I know everyone wants to be social, but there's not the ability to do that at this time, and you might find it hard to concentrate on what you need to do for work, and it would be best to keep things simple and mundane, if at all possible. Tomorrow, there is a Mercury-Uranus alignment, and today, as it comes in, you might be feeling as if you're spinning, confused, or just plain unhappy. Practice empathy at all costs, and know that your emotional expression right now is one-sided, so others are also struggling. So do what you need to do and let others find their own way. Remember, you cannot rescue anyone. Those with the tendency to illness are not feeling well or aligned right now, so don't overindulge, and it can cause some big problems with everyone around you. Okay, my quote for today. I love to hear the stories of others' pasts. I love to listen to what remains and lasts. I love to discover the journey of souls. I love to honor their paths and goals. Perhaps in this time where we stand alone, we get to review how we found our way home. Each journey is a wonder to behold, and each soul has a story to be told. All right, so my story to be told today is that when I was about 8 years old, my father invested with some friends of his in a uranium mine that was up in the Salle Mountains in Utah, outside of Moab. So that 2 summers in a row, we went up there to explore what they were doing and to kind of have a vacation. The area was high up in the Salle Mountains outside of Moab, and it was beautiful and magical, but the mine was in a very difficult and potentially inaccessible place high in the mountains. But to a child, this was a wonder, and its remoteness was fantastic. Filled with the wildness of nature and many unexplored territories. I love the coolness of the mine in the heat of the summer, and though I was never allowed to go very far into the mine, there was always this cool wind coming up from the ground, and standing in the opening was like standing in an open refrigerator door. My father would discuss many things with his friends, and the families would camp and make dinners, but we were never without the company of a group of very determined skunks. Now, these skunks were like a band of bullies, and the moment you opened a can of anything or opened a bag of anything, here they would come, marching in with their tails up to the ready. The smell of one skunk is quite something, but imagine 20 of them. So let's just say stinky does not do it justice. No matter what, we would end up retreating to our tents while they scoured around looking for scraps. And these were very big skunks. I have cute little skunks on my property now, and they're adorable and small, but these were clunkers. I mean, they were well fed by something somewhere. So one day I retreated from Skunk City. Instead of going into the tent, I decided to go exploring. And there was a creek coming down the mountain in a sharp, steep line. So I was wandering down the creek when suddenly there was a blue woman standing in front of me. Now, from the time I was a child, I see things such as ghosts, guides, and nature spirits. And somehow I always knew the difference between all of those. And this one was a bit bigger and more important than a nature spirit. She was more like a god or a protector of a mountain. And after studying with the Quechuan people of Peru, I now know that the Peruvians call them apus, and they are the spirits of the mountains. I have met a few of them in my life, but this was one of my first experiences, and I'll tell you some of the other stories at another time. Now, she was this bluish lavender color. She didn't have feet. She had substance, though, and it was like she was like a slightly moving breeze. And she pointed to the scree field high up on the mountain and simply said, "You need to let them know that the plane they are looking for is up there." And I replied, "What plane?" And she said, "Why, the plane that crashed. They are looking for it." Again, I said, "Who's looking for it?" And she said, "The families." And from the angle that we were at, because I had kind of come way down the slope, and the angle of the sun in that moment, there was a reflection like metal was coming off the mountain just below the top. And she said again, "Tell the miner and your father." And I said that I would, and the breeze carried her off in the wind. I went to my dad but from the different angle, because I had climbed up, you could not see the metal reflecting. And I'm sure he thought I was seeing things or making things up. And then I went to the miner and I told him, and he looked up there, but he could not see anything. He even got out his binoculars and was trying to look to where I was pointing. But it was a very large mountain, and later I found out it was a very small plane that had literally hit head first into the mountain, and it was in tiny pieces like everywhere. I kept insisting that it was there, and at least the miner did not discount me. And a few days went by, and I kept looking towards the spot, waiting until the sun was just right and there would be a slight metal glimmer. Then I ran to the miner and pointed up again. And this time he saw it, and he fixed his binoculars on that spot and then solemnly called my dad and the men over. And the next thing I know is that the men are going on an expedition up to that spot, and off they went. It was a really tough hike. It took them a full day, and by the time they got back, their faces told me that the blue lady was right. My father took us down to a lower campground, went to the police station to do a report with the miner, and the next day a lot of people were going up the narrow road to our mine because it was the closest vantage point to hike to get to the crash site. And sure enough, they found a plane that had vanished and the families had been looking for. While there were no survivors, at least the families had closure. Only many years later, as an adult, did I hear about the tales of the Blue Lady of the Salle Mountains. And I realized that the mountains look blue, and in many moments because of how the light is, and the range will go completely blue. And that Blue Lady was clearly guarding those mountains. And I'm grateful to have seen her as a child. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye.